With the question of growth comes value. So as you grow, your value grows, and as you have different skill sets or different roles that you take on, how do you value those things? So like Angie, how do you value your work as a printmaker versus doing a publication? Or Koya, how do you balance your writing versus your directing? Or and how does maybe your teaching or your growth play a part in that? Alex, how do you decide how you price, what you charge for the work that you do depending on where you're doing it, and how do you make those decisions? And any of you can jump in.
I think that is a very difficult question. I think that Koya spoke to it very well. You can't do things for free, but you have to do things that are of value to you and you get benefit from. And I know that it's a rich conversation to talk about if artists should work for free, like for no money, meaning, not your definition of free. And it's tricky. I think the trickiest thing is that it sets up the expectation that that's how it will be in the future. And it also sets that expectation up for your fellow artists. So I personally think like a good example in my industry is bands want posters and they rarely want to pay. And it just really depends where you're at. If you want a portfolio and you don't have a portfolio and you genuinely like the band and you want to make more work for bands like them, then definitely you're going to get a great portfolio piece. But if you don't like, you don't have to like the music, but if you think that to make the band happy you're going to make a poster that you're not even going to want to put in your portfolio, then why in the world would you take that job on? And if once you do, they're going to expect the same thing next time. So every year I make a poster for the Battle of the Jug Bands. And I made the first poster when I had just started Sputnik. Sputnik was like nothing. It like had just began. I didn't have any portfolio. I just got out of art school. And I was like, yeah, I'll do that, $75. And that included the paper and the ink. I don't know what I was thinking. I was like at a complete loss of, I made like $4. But it served that purpose. I put it in my portfolio. And then a year later, they're like, great, you want to do it again? I'm like, yeah, definitely. It's going to be like 125. And they're like, really? Because it was 75 last year. And I do this conversation every year with them because now I've been doing it for 6 years. And I don't charge $100 anymore to make a poster. And it's hard because they're one of my best clients, but my value keeps changing because I am definitely not who I was 6 years ago. I have years of experience now. So that's not really, I guess it's just a warning to be careful when you do undervalue what you're providing, that you're going to be stuck doing that in the future if you're not really careful or willing to have tricky conversations.
So I charge $500 an hour. That's just the number that I decided at this point in my career. That doesn't mean that everybody pays me $500 an hour, but that's what I invoice at. And then I put the discount that somebody is getting. And I think that that is important for two reasons. When somebody submits their budget, they have an in-kind donation. That helps me with my accountant also. Lots of 1099s. My accountant is never happy to see me. I bring him a bottle of alcohol every time I show up there. But it also helps them think about what this would really cost them if they hadn't developed this relationship with me. I tend to be pretty scrutinizing, and I have a good sense of an organization's budget, having run organizations myself. I'm not going to charge, like I just did a free workshop for the Better Boys Foundation. I'm not going to charge them working with really low-income youth to do a poetry workshop, anything. That's something I'm happy to do. I had room in my schedule. If University of Chicago wants me to come do a gig, you can bet that they're paying me $500 an hour minimum because they have it in their budget. I've worked at University of Chicago. They could pay me a lot more. They're getting me cheap at that. But that's what I invoice everybody. And I think it's really important to set your set your value, articulate it. So then when it comes up, you're in a position to say, yeah, I charged you this last year, but it's more expensive to be a person this year than it was last year. And I understand that your organization may be dealing with that too. So let's negotiate, and what's the added value going to be?
I agree. I set my hourly rate. I mean, mine's not 500 yet, but it's like $250 an hour, and then because I'm a circus professional, and I say that's like industry standard is what I would say, and that I've gotten paid that before, and I've also gotten paid more than that before, but it's under the understanding that I'm providing them what they want, and I'm also a circus professional or whatever, clown professional or mime professional, expert, juggler, extraordinaire, and it's also I base how much I charge on for each gig on what I'm also getting out of it that isn't money, like you were talking about. Like if it's something that I have always wanted to do and they don't have necessarily a high enough budget to give me exactly what I want, I'm getting like a great experience out of it. And it's a life experience that's fun for me. Or if sometimes a lot of events, if it's like someone who doesn't have that much money, they'll give me a nice meal, and like I'm 26 years old and I don't really have that. I mean, I have to pay rent and pay student loans. So for me, it's okay for me for someone to be like, hey, we'll give you a meal and then you can hang out and like party and drink afterwards if you want, and also here's your check and hey, great job. So yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to hog this question. I just wanted to add that some of the work that Sputnik does, and therefore I do, is publishing work for clients. So they'll people who need something printed, we don't do design work, but we'll just execute it as a print. And I found that if you undercharge, the other bad thing that happens is that if it doesn't work out and something gets messed up, you're not going to have the drive to fix it and make it right, and then you've ruined a relationship. So you have to, I can look at a job and say, okay, that should take 4 hours. My rate's $500. It's $2,000. But if something goes wrong and it actually takes 9, I don't want to burn a bridge because I said, oh well, it's good enough because I'm not making enough money to put in the extra 5 hours. You have to be able to like put in that extra amount if push comes to shove. So I always, my hourly rate is more than I need per hour, precisely because I know some things will take longer than I had originally planned.
So at this point, I want to open it up for questions. So are there any questions? Let's start here.
I noticed that none of you really mentioned social media that you use as far as your connections. Have you used it? Has it been successful? How have you used it as a tool to generate revenue? How's it revenated?
Well, actually, the reason that I was here is because I was talking about that with Jillian, and I don't have at this point. I've been doing event entertainment for about 5 years, and the last 2 years has been I've been able to quit my day job, and so I actually haven't gotten down to making a really good website, but through Facebook and this Gig Salad, social media, like people find me on the internet and ask me to do gigs like all the time, and also see images of me through the Actors Gym and Circus Team websites, yeah, I'm not the best person to talk about social media. Here you go.
I love social media. I take it very seriously. I teach a class on social media at DePaul for the theater students. I don't know that it resonates per se. That's my new favorite word. I'm gonna hashtag that. But what it does is help you build community and maintain relationships. And so, and I have found that really, really valuable to just stay in touch with people. And again, I think it's really important to think about what you are offering somebody else. I think the worst kind of Twitter feed or the worst kind of Facebook page is one that's just self-promotion. That's so boring. Especially when you're not super famous. So like, who cares what gig I'm doing? Especially if nobody cares about me, or I do art because I want to be in community with people. I want to build things with people, and social media is a part of that, also a way of staying in touch. And so I actually try to promote myself as little as possible, and use those things really to build bridges, to establish interests. I've gotten a lot of gigs because somebody said, "Oh, I remember Koya was like, she's a vegan," So when they need somebody who's going to talk about, sort of the politics of like race and sustainable eating and veganism, and weirdly, I'll get that gig because of some tweet that I did. Does that make sense? And I also know how to connect people. I know who to reach out to because I am genuinely engaging with people on social media. It's not just promotional. And I do have a website, and I am trying to think about ways to drive traffic to my website. Facebook. I use everything, and I use distinct content on each one, because I hate when people's Twitter feed is basically their Facebook feed. Why would I follow you on both? That makes no sense to me. But the advantage of having multiple platforms is that these things are rushing by, and you can have something that somebody might catch here, something that somebody might catch there, but you're not inundating them with the same thing. I'll stop talking because I could talk about it for 10 weeks.
I think that social media is very important. I'm terrible at using it for my own self, Angie, as opposed to Sputnik. And my website's awful. Don't go to it, please.
That's such good promotion, because now everybody will want to.
No.
Like, how awful is it?
No. Please. I thought you guys were my friends. Well, speaking of revenue, I need a new computer. My computer won't even run Safari, and so I can't update my website except at work. So that's why you need to charge enough for your services so that you can afford to buy a new computer. But it's something that I actually am very aware there's things I could probably be getting and be hired for if people who have heard of me were able to actually see the work that I've made. So I feel the weight of what it could be doing for me that it's not. And I just want to also pipe in that it is really important, but I do think that in-person, personal relationships are much stronger and are ultimately going to make a bigger difference. There's a few key people that I met in school when I was 20 and had no idea I would eventually be running a print shop. But they've sent students my way, they've sent equipment my way, they've passed my name along to different places that have hired me to teach. I've been able to call on them for advice or help when I'm in a sticky situation, and that is invaluable. So just whoever you meet, always know that you don't know who they are yet, but approach them with kindness and goodwill, and they'll probably return it because that's human nature.
Can I say one more thing about social media? Creative Capital, are people familiar with Creative Capital? Yeah, so they're a funding organization, but they also do a lot of support and education for artists. They do webinars. They're based in New York, but they have one that is basically social media for artists. And if you ever get an opportunity to take that workshop either as a webinar or if they're in Chicago, I really, really recommend it. And it is the kind of thing where they will sit with you and help you knock out a website in 2 hours and talk about ways to make it sustainable. And again, I taught a class on this already, but when I took that workshop, it blew my mind. I learned so much. So that's just my plug, Creative Capital. Get on their mailing list. Also, they hand out money like crazy, so get on that mailing list.
Yeah, I mean, when you have different jobs, you're marketing to different people for a lot of it. So do you have like 6 different business cards and 6 different websites? Or if you kind of mesh it all together somehow?
Speak to that and how you brought your website together.
Yeah, so I have my website, koyapaz.com, the lovely and talented Koya Paz, which of course has all kinds of useful information about all the different projects I'm working on. And then each of these institutions has their own website too, so I try to make them, I don't actually manage any of the institutional websites except Free Streets. And I have a business card. I use my business card, the lovely and talented Koya Paz business card. so vain, right? I'm so lovely and talented. And even that is a takeaway. I'm happy to give you guys some of my business cards afterwards because I think they're pretty cute. They're like affirmations. They're hello, beautiful, hello, handsome, sometimes in Spanish. Try to just make it something someone might want to just hang up on their mirror. And that way, because I have so many affiliations, like check me out there, and then you can find out about all these other things. But then each of those institutions' websites also link back to mine.
And for any grant writing that you do to help fund the work that you were sort of speaking of that wouldn't otherwise be as lucrative as your hourly rate, were you self-taught to write grants? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I have not written grants for myself, which is I just haven't had time. But I have written grants for Sputnik Press, and I've also written residency applications, which I think are pretty similar in how you approach your writing skills. I have gone to a handful of workshops similar to what's happening here on grant writing. And I've also been lucky enough to read a lot of residency applications for Sputnik Press. And I actually started the residency program before I had ever been to a residency, and before I had ever served on a panel to review residency applications, but it's eye-opening. So I encourage people to take little workshops that they find through places like CAC. There's also, for organizations, a place called Donors Forum that has really great grant writing workshops, very thorough, multiple day workshops. But also just to read as many as you can. Ask your friends who've applied for things if you can read their application. It doesn't matter if they got the grant. You're gonna have your own gut reaction. You're gonna be like, oh, that didn't read well, or that fun. And just note those. And you're also gonna come across some that read really easily, and you can try to just figure out why. And also have lots of people read your grant applications. Everyone, have your mom read it. Have someone who has no idea what art is read it. And if they don't understand it, you don't need to water it down. You just need to clarify and distill what you're doing and why. And explain why it's important that it's made beyond you want to make it. Yeah.
Was there one other that I missed in the first 3 rounds? Was it you?
Go ahead. I was curious, this is again for Andy, about what you said as an arts administrator, how you feel about creative practice.
You tell me to free form talk about that? Yeah, I can do that. Well, I think a lot of art making is problem solving and communication. You're trying to express an idea of some sort to somebody, And I think, I don't know how to word, there's a better way to word this, but I kind of orchestrate many things, like a conductor of sorts. So I'm not, I work two-dimensionally usually. I might do that on a paper with watercolor or something. But you can also do it with balancing out programs and finding meaningful ways to express crafting a mission statement is really a very creative thing to do. And it takes the precision that I bring to my art. It's sort of a free-form answer. If you want me to address something more specifically, I can. Cool. Of course.
Yeah, can you address, first of all, can you tell me how important it is in branding, and how do you pretty much go about establishing that? It seems like all of you have one basic thing in common, that you're approaching art as an entrepreneur, and you're deciding pretty much what is important, what is relevant as you go through. So I just wonder if you can just talk about branding in reference to all of it. Cody?
Yeah, branding is a tricky thing because on the one hand, it provides a kind of package that helps people understand what you're doing, but sometimes it can then people won't think about you for something, that just because you usually do X, Y, or Z, and that's what you're promoting, then nobody's going to hire you for H. I don't know, getting lost in those letters. When I started thinking about kind of branding myself, it was because I was working as artistic director at Teatro Luna doing Latina ensemble created work. I was also working as a poet, and I was a graduate student, and my work as a graduate student is on the kind of history of racial violence in the United States. I would do work on lynching. That's really disparate stuff to put into one package, and so people kept saying, well, what do you do? I was also teaching public speaking. I was teaching workshops on performing poetry. I was a safer sex educator. I was doing a lot of different things and trying, if someone would say, what do you do at a party? I don't have an answer for that. So I just started as a joke saying, I'm lovely and talented. I do lots of things. And that kind of actually became the thing. I added in the lip gloss because it was better than putting like the expert on lynching on your website. Nobody wants to come back to that one. Though I am passionate about both. And actually lip gloss is like my little lifesaver on desperate days because it does make you desperate to think about that stuff too much. See, wah, wah, wah. That's what happens if you talk to me for more than 5 minutes. And so I think that part of thinking about branding is thinking first, what do you do? And is there a simple way to explain it, right? If you're a photographer and videographer, and that's what you do, great, you got them, check. Just start telling people that. If what you do is more complicated, what you might want to start doing is sort of what is the tone of what you do? What can people expect? So you can probably already guess from our conversation that even when I'm doing a workshop, for example, on white privilege, which I do a lot, you can get a sense of what the tone of that is going to be. And that is not for everybody, right? Some people want a more kind of serious approach to it. Some people like the fact that I'm going to make a lot of jokes and then sucker punch and then make a joke. That's my style, and that's what I've tried to brand. Does that make sense as an answer, that you can either brand what you do or you can brand the style of what you do? Yeah, it is, because some people start to kind of know you in a certain way. But nobody can do everything. Although I do think that it is useful to be the kind of person who's willing to give it a try. But there's a big difference between, I love the story that you were telling about learning to do balloon animals. That makes sense, because that is in kind of the sort of package. If someone says, we need someone to do balloon animals at the party, yep, I got that. Versus, we need somebody who is going to build wax sculptures that somebody could stand on by tomorrow. That might be a stretch. I don't know. You seem very talented. Does it make sense what I'm saying? You still have to think about what is the sort of gist of what you do and how do you make people sort of understand that this is your range. I pass on a lot of gigs because it would be so much work to learn that by next week. I don't have time for that. Drop the mic.
I was wondering how you became a teaching artist. Was it Koya? Did you say you were a teaching artist? Or
These two.
was it Andrew?
I began, well, actually, my very first teaching engagement, I taught a book binding class at Paper Source. And I was so nervous. Oh my God, I can't tell you how nervous I was. And now I'm like, Paper Source? Yeah, okay, I can just show up. But that was the very first thing that I did, and I was an employee at Paper Source, so it got me that in. And then that basically got my nerves out a little bit. But when I really began working as a teaching artist, I began as a teaching assistant, and I was right out of school, so I not to be ageist, but I fit in as an assistant. But I think no matter what age you are, if you want to be a teaching artist and you're older, starting as an assistant is amazing because you don't have the weight of leading the classroom, so you can actually pay attention to what's happening much better, and you can observe teaching styles. And there's quite a few places in Chicago where you can be hired to be an assistant, and there's also a gazillion places that would love a volunteer assistant, and I think it's totally worth doing. So I was a teaching assistant for 3 years, I think. And sometimes at Marwin, you'll kind of get paired with a teaching artist, and if it goes well, you'll stay with that teaching artist. I don't know if this frustrated anyone, but every term is like, can I teach you someone new? Can I teach you someone new? And the reason was to observe many, many different teaching styles. So therefore, I could start to figure out my own teaching philosophy. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that. Yeah. Not to exclude everyone else. Do you want to teach youth or adults or?
I think either one. Yeah, I like teenagers and older.
Yeah.
That's my preference.
If there's Marwin is a great organization that approaches the teaching arts with the philosophy of like hire an artist who's in the industry, and there's no education degree required. There's also an organization called CAPE, the Community Arts Partnerships and Education, and there was one more that's on the tip of my tongue. But I think Chicago's actually a really good city for organizations really respecting that art should be taught by practitioners, not by people with education degrees. So. Mm-hmm.
How did you get the first gig about it? Like, how do you prove that you can do it without a certificate or some kind of resume to show I can do this?
Well, I was able to. I don't know if I have advice that translates broadly, because at Sputnik I hired myself to teach because I ran Sputnik. I didn't have to like submit a resume. And at Marwin I put in my 3 years, and I submitted an application to teach, and the first one they're like, I don't think you're ready. And I asked for a meeting, and we talked through what I proposed and why they were worried, and I TA'd a couple more classes, and then I was ready. But I think make sure you teach someone. When I interview people to teach at Sputnik now, I hire a lot of people that don't have teaching experience, but I ask them to tell me about a time that they've taught something. And most people will step up and say, oh, yeah, I was in this class and I had been playing with this technique and a fellow student wanted to know about it. And then I can learn their teaching style just through how they've informally taught. I don't always care that they have been hired by another organization. They just need to have taught someone in some sense.
I could answer that question. My first gig I got was just because I was doing it already, and so because I was like already able to do I was a juggling class or something, and it's because I already had the expertise. I didn't need I don't need a certificate to be like I can teach you how to juggle. It's like if you know how to juggle, you can teach you how to juggle. But I also taught circus skills at University of Chicago, like in their circus class. They had a semester of circus, and I don't have a degree in teaching, but because I'm an expert in the field, because if you're an expert in the field, you don't need a teaching degree, right? That's what you were saying before, too.
I still can't be hired by universities because I don't have an MFA. But I can teach other places.
Well, yeah, I guess just be an expert.
Or volunteer, right? And I think that this has come up before, right? If you really want to teach and you haven't done it, or you really want a job anywhere but you don't have anything on your resume that points to you being a viable candidate at that job, most not-for-profits are pretty happy to take somebody as a volunteer. Now, that's not something you want to do forever all the time, and I think a lot of young people coming out of college, for example, are getting sucked into this kind of mandatory free internship life, and that has its pros and cons. We want to sort of be careful. It's the same thing I tell my students about understudying. Understudying is fine, but if you do it 5 times, people are only ever going to call you to be an understudy. So again, you're looking at your end game. But just going to the place where you're interested in working, or the kind of work you're interested in doing, and saying, hey, I'm interested in this. How can I help? I'm trying to build my resume. A lot of people are willing to mentor younger artists. A lot of people need help. They feel stretched thin. But for you, again, know what the end game is for you. Eventually, you're hoping they pay you, and or your resume lets you get paid somewhere else.
How did you start with Petaluma? Did you have a budget for it? How many people were involved? And just the starting things starting that.
Yeah, I started it so stupidly. I don't recommend it to anybody to start it. First of all, I don't recommend you start a theater company, which is so hypocritical because that's what I did and that's why I have a job. But I just really naively, I met my co-founder at an audition. It was an audition where we both felt we were being incredibly disrespected as Latina women. And so we were venting about that. And one of us said as a joke, we should start a theater company. This one happened in our own theater company. And then we decided to do it. We put an ad in Performing, which existed at the time, with no idea what to do to start a theater company. Total folly. And but then all these women came to it. It's like, if you build it, they will come. All these women responded to our ad, like, hey, now we have a Latina theater company. So, and then we just started making plays. Our hairstylist lent us their salon after hours, and that's where we rehearsed. And we'd really like sweep aside fake nails and rehearse. That was where we could get a free space. We don't have any money. We did a show of work in progress. We advertised it on email, just send it out to people, and a couple hundred women came. That's how much people wanted there to be a Latina theater company. And we just started going from there. We had no business sense. We didn't even know how to balance our checkbook. I still don't balance my checkbook. I look on my phone to see how much money is in my account before I make a purchase. Fiscally irresponsible. But that's really how we start. If I had known half of what I knew, I would never have done it. So then that's why I sort of think if there's something you really, really want to do, don't think too hard. And it's not easy. I would never do it again. I will always be really supportive of young people who come to me and say, hey, I'm starting a theater company. Because I don't think people took us very seriously at the beginning. Why would they? We didn't know anything. But I don't know if that answers the question. We had no education about it. And yet the company is still going. Both of the founders have moved on. It's been 14 years. I think that's pretty impressive. They're still doing it. It's a whole new generation of Latino women. So I feel really proud to have done that. And now I know how to balance an institutional budget. That would be sad for Free Street if I didn't. And now I have more sense, but at the time I just sort of cast about to see what worked, and lots of things didn't. I had lots of crying over Excel spreadsheets because I didn't know how to work it or how to make them add up, or terrible.
Do we have any final questions? Anyone?
Oh, I had a question for Angie. You work with high school students, right? And I've been working with preschool kids for the past 5 or 6 years. And sometimes I think about, okay, well, I want to move on. Maybe I'll, become a teaching artist. Well, I guess kind of am still. So I just think, because I was talking to some teachers and they're like, oh, I would just hate to work with high school students. They're so disrespectful. And so can you tell me what your experience is with that?
I would last like 3 minutes working with 5-year-olds. I think I would have a harder time if I was working in CPS schools day in and day out. I don't think I'm cut out to work as a full-time teacher in the type of environment where 45 students are cycling through every 45 minutes. Because I think they end up being disrespectful, but if you meet them as individuals, high schoolers are not inherently disrespectful. It's all the context you put them in and the support you give them. And if you look them in the eye and treat them as a peer, I've rarely seen disrespect. So I guess with that said, you have to find an organization that has that culture. And Marwin, which is the main place where I teach high school students, it's kind of just people just put it like it's a checkbox that they have to fill out. But one of them is that they want to be there. And as soon as there's an issue, we're able to say, well, do you want to be here? No one's making you be here. So of course you can't do that in public school because they do have to be there. But I find it incredibly rewarding, and I think I've actually thought the same thing as you, except I'm already working with high school students, so do I want to teach college students? And I feel like, I don't know, 19-year-old, they're really disrespectful. And I'm actually really happy working with high school students. I think it's really, really rewarding to be one of the first people that's helping them think, use visual thinking skills, which is kind of a snotty art term, but I think it's something that everybody needs, whether they decide to be an artist or not. We need them to support the arts as they move on in their lives. So I wouldn't be scared of working with older students. Of course.
So thank you, Angie, Koya, and Alex, for taking the time out to speak tonight. And thank you all for coming. Give yourselves a hand.